Welcome into the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM. The fastest 2 minutes in sports, just days away. The 150th Kentucky Derby, Saturday at Churchill Downs in Louisville. Brendan Glasheen, your host. We have Mike Conti joining us, our Action Network horse racing contributor, and our pal Sean Zerillo, a jack of all trades. Great to have you with us. Call this your Kentucky Derby best bets / preview. We got a lot to get to here and hopefully 30 minutes or so to get you set for the weekend. Just a couple of quick notes, guys. We know Fierceness is the favorite for this coming weekend, coming off a victory in the Florida Derby. A couple of interesting notes as far as the post position draws. They're not favorable for Fierceness, the favorite in Sierra Leone. Those are some things to call out, and that means the horses are going to move down one spot in the starting gates, and that means Epic Ride is into the field, just etching into that 20th spot. So with that being said, Sean Zerillo, I'll throw to you first. Your leadoff thought as we get set for the Derby this weekend.
Well, I'd like to try to cut the field in half with Mike. You know, anytime I'm taking this 20-horse Derby field, I want to eliminate about 20 of the horses off the bat. So I'm going to toss out some names, and I'm going to see if Mike disagrees with any of them. And if he has any to potentially add to the list. So the number one, Dornoch, to me is a rabbit. I'm going to toss him. The number 5, Catalytic, is 30-1, doesn't fit for me on the past performances. The number 6, Just Steel, I like on the past performances, but he has not worked well apparently this week. So I'm going to toss the number 6, Just Steel, even though he did pop up as a potential selection for me. The number 10, Tio Password, coming over from Japan. I prefer the other Japanese horse, and also Tio Password does not look great at Churchill Downs. The 12, Track Phantom, is a rabbit, adding blinkers. I think he's just going to go too fast and then fade. The 13, West Saratoga, doesn't fit for me. The 14, Endlessly, is a bit of a wild card because he's coming over from a synthetic track. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. It tends to be that these synthetic racers or racers who do well on synthetic tend to do better on the turf. So I'm going to toss the 14, Endlessly, but I won't be shocked if he ends up getting into money. The 16, Gramo, the first at 50-1, and then finally the 21, Epic Ride, the final horses I'm tossing. So, Mike, amongst that group of 9 horses that I just listed out, any you disagree with and any that you would add to the list?
Yeah, so Sean, I agree mostly with you. Just Steel is a horse that I'm keeping included.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not tossing Just Steel. I think for a lot of the reasons that you just mentioned. And look, I mean, who in this sport doesn't have a little bit of a soft spot for the coach, Dwayne Lucas, who's the trainer of Just Steel? In addition, other horses that I would toss, I'm tossing both Japanese horses. So also adding in 11, Forever Young. If you look at the history of the Derby and the horses who have shipped in from overseas, they have not historically run well. And I think that trend will most likely continue. The only other one that you mentioned that didn't mention that I would add in to tossing is number 20, Society Man. If you look at what the Wood Memorial, which is the prep race that Society Man ran in, if you look at what the Wood has produced in terms of Kentucky Derby runners, it's not good. It's not a high quality prep race historically. And so I'm just going to take and toss him as well.
Yeah, I was on the fence with the 20 Society Man, so interesting to hear you add him. Maybe I'll end up taking him off my tickets. He is in with a group of 9 horses for now. There's a couple that I'm going to try to beat, which we'll get to when we talk about our top win contenders. But yeah, I think we're in mostly agreement with at least 7 or 8 horses there who you can just take off your tickets. And then I think there's other correlated ways you could go about betting this race depending on the pace. Again, we'll talk about the favorites in a second, but you know, if you can pair closers together, like Catching Freedom and Sierra Leone, horses you think may be coming from the back, or you could be going more with horses who may be coming from the front with a more moderate pace. So, but you know, no matter how you're handicapping that race, I always like to find horses I'm not interested in using no matter how the pace shakes out. And then we can start talking about the pace and the favorites and which long shots we like to come in underneath. So yeah, I think we've got a pretty good starting point once we cut down half the field.
All right, there you go. So we eliminate the clutter for this best bets episode, which is fitting for the purposes of our audience and what we're trying to accomplish here. So with that, knowing that you are mostly in agreement on which horses you can toss off your card, let's discuss the favorite win contender. Sean Zerillo, you can start us.
Yeah, I'm going to take Fierceness as my lone A on top. I think Mike has a bit wider of an opinion as to who he thinks could win this race. And you know, in terms of how I handicap this, I think Fierceness wins this race 50% of the time. So getting 5-2 on the morning line, and probably goes off at 2-1 or 3-2. And there's still an edge there when you really think about it, right? You know, the difference between 20-1 and 40-1 is like the difference between even money and -110. The difference between 3-2 and 5-2, you know, is the difference between I'm doing the math potentially wrong here in my head, but like +233 and +150. I mean, it's a much bigger difference in terms of percentage because you're jumping by 7 to 10% once you're getting towards those favorites, where with the long shots, you're jumping like 2 or 3% every time it doubles. So I think the odds are going to be ripe if it's above even money, essentially. But I'm still going to use him as my lone favorite on top. If he runs his best race, I don't think anybody else beats him. And he's already run a 110 buyer speed figure, which is, I believe, the highest for any Derby prep race in the past decade. Only one other horse, Mystic Dan, has even run above 100. But Fierceness also has a 105 from the Breeders' Cup Juvenile last year. Is whatever race he won at the end. I think it was the Breeders' Cup Juvenile in November. So he has the top 2 speed figures of any horse in this field. And normally you'd say, okay, you know, you expect some regression. You expect other horses to improve. No, I don't think he's run his best race yet. And he's training as well as any horse at Churchill Downs in the week leading up to the race. By all accounts from Clockers and his trainer, Todd Pletcher, he's sitting on a career best race. He lost 2 starts back in the Holy Bowl. This is the first start of his form cycle. Didn't seem to have enough in the tank down the stretch. Came back, set the record for this group in terms of speed figures for the year with the 110 in the Florida Derby and just blasted away from that field. And if he's taking any sort of improvement off of that race, they're not going to touch him. If he just runs back to that race, he probably still wins. So I think the rest of this field needs him to regress. And then they also need to have somebody step up in order to take down Fierceness. And I also, you know, I don't mind the post at all. First off, sliding from 17 to 16, you know, in terms of the draw, maybe it changes his luck a little bit. I'll still have that 17 saddlecloth on him. And horses with the 17 saddlecloth are 0 for 44 in the Derby. But in 2020 at Churchill Downs, they changed the gate. It used to be 15 horses in a main gate and then a 5-horse auxiliary gate with a kind of a gap in between them that forced those outside horses to jump over and like crush the entire field over from the start. Now that there's been that auxiliary gate, I mean, the first year they introduced it, the 17 horse finished second. So I think there's just, you know, more of a fair play in terms of how the early part of that race goes. But secondly, all of the speed is drawn to his inside. All of the other horses who I expect to go early, Dornock, Just a Touch. I'm definitely missing one, Track Phantom. So all of those horses are going to be going on his inside, and he just wants to go out, get over, and by the end of that first turn, be sitting, you know, 1 path or 2 paths off the horse in first place. Or if they give him the lead, he'd be happy to take it. But yeah, he's shown versatility, the ability to win on the lead. He's shown versatility with the ability to sit off the leader and then pass horses in the stretch. And I don't think he's going to face as much track trouble or traffic during the race as other horses who are on the inside, like Sierra Leone might. So I like Sierra Leone. I respect them. I think with the closers, they're going to need a hot pace, which they've had the past 2 years, and they're going to need traffic to clear out for them. And you just need a lot to go right. Fierceness doesn't need as much to go right. He just needs to run as fast as he has in the past.
Best speed in the field, Mike Conti, and as Zerillo teased, you might have interest in a couple more horses that could win this thing.
Yeah, you know, look, Fierceness, to Sean's point, Fierceness runs his race. I think he's an absolute freak. The questions are, who did he face in that Florida Derby? Again, number of those horses are coming back. The way he moved so effortlessly, Johnny V never even had to shake the reins on him in that Florida Derby. It was like he was just galloping around the track, and to do it in the fashion he did, super impressive. When you're talking about a 20-horse field, and again, you know, we also don't know, like Fierceness has thrown up some clunkers in his career, like which Fierceness shows up today, right? I mean, you go back, and I understand it was in the slop, but back in October of last year in the Champagne, I mean, he finished 20 lengths behind the leader as the odds-on favorite in that race. You know, again, he's been training well. He looked superb in the Florida Derby. I don't know, 5-2 in a 20-horse field, just too many things that can go wrong. I'm not going to let Fierceness beat me in any of my bets, but I'm looking elsewhere for top selections. And my top selection, I'm going a little bit further to the inside to the number 8, Just a Touch. A couple of interesting things to look at with Just a Touch. One, he only made his career debut back in January. Similar to his sire, his father, Justify, who won the Derby and won the Triple Crown as a 3-year-old who never ran as a 2-year-old. Justify, put away this age-old just something, something that hadn't been done before, where you hadn't run at 2 and then you win at 3 to win the Derby at 3. And so Just a Touch coming in very, very lightly raced, coming in off, I would argue, a really good, if there's such a thing, second place finish in the Bluegrass Stakes. And, Sierra Leone came motoring home in that Bluegrass to win. And not to knock Sierra Leone too much, because I do like him somewhat, but I think every stretch run, he's looked very green. Head's been cocked. He's drifted side to side. Just a Touch looked really good. And the jockey of Just a Touch, Florent Giroux, when he came off after that Bluegrass, he said that he thought that Just a Touch had another year, and he didn't know as though that he was going to need it. He thought Sierra Leone was too far back, wasn't going to be able to get there. If Just a Touch can take a step forward, and given how lightly raced he's been, I think it's very realistic to assume that he's going to take another step forward. That, look out, right? Because he's a horse who, again, doesn't need the lead, is going to be forwardly placed or more forwardly placed. And again, Sean mentioned it. In a field of 20 horses, there's possible weather coming this weekend to Louisville, rain, possibly Thursday, rain, possibly Friday and Saturday as well. The question then becomes, like, what does that do to everybody else? How does that impact the closers, right? It's one thing to take dirt in the face. It's another thing to take mud in their face. And so you want a horse, I think, that's going to be a little bit more forwardly placed. I don't know as though that you want Track Phantom, who I think is a rabbit, as Sean mentioned. But so for a lot of those reasons, I'm ending up on my top selection, number 8, Just a Touch at 10-1.
Yeah, I mean, we just have them reversed. I have Just a Touch in second as my second choice. And, he was second the entire way around in the Bluegrass. The horses who finished in front of and behind him both came from the back of the pack, Sierra Leone and the 21 horse in this field now, Epic Ride. So, yeah, I think that race was very impressive and a very impressive second place finish. And if I'm picking another horse to win this race, not to use underneath in second or third in exotics as prices, but if I'm using a B horse to actually win this race on multi-race tickets or on 2-day tickets or on just straight exotics, it's Just a Touch and its fierceness. And I'm probably not interested in anybody else as true win contenders, which means I'm against the 4 Catching Freedom and the 2 Sierra Leone. I just expect a slightly more moderate pace this year. We've gotten wicked paces the past 2 years, which allowed Mage and which allowed Rich Strike to come from the back of the pack and win those races. And ultimately, neither of them ended up winning another race after that. So they were the best on that day. They got a great pace set up. I don't think the pace is necessarily going to set up for Catching Freedom or Sierra Leone like it has in recent iterations of the race. You tend to agree with that, Mike?
Yeah, I do think that I generally agree with you. I do think, though, that there's going to be quite a bit of pace. I mean, Track Phantom has proved that one-trick pony, no pun intended. I mean, the only thing that horse can do is go to the lead. And so I do think, like, thinking back, and you can correct me here, Sean, on how many years ago this was. I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago now, when Promises Fulfilled went to the lead in the Derby and sent like some crazy fast fractions up front. That to me is like what Track Phantom is going to do. Now, I think the difference this year is, does anybody else go with Track Phantom and try to like really push that pace? So Track Phantom may be out on the lead, possibly by himself, depending upon what Fierceness wants to do, what Dornoch wants to do. If Track Phantom's on the lead by himself, I don't necessarily consider a 1-horse pace the pace of the race, because it's what's the rest of the field then doing. It's how many horses are in that early group, as I would like to look at it, as opposed to a single horse that's just out in front, which I think is more of a possibility this year. So I do think that there will be, from a fraction standpoint, good pace, but I don't know as though that there will be that group of horses necessarily up front like we've seen in the last few years.
Yeah, I think Dornoch has to go from the 1 post, and he likes to be forward as well. But yeah, after those two, like maybe those two are pace dueling out in front, and then there's a second flight that Just a Touch and Fierceness is in, that are your real contenders, just kind of waiting for those two to fade. So yeah, I think they may try to rabbit it. And, with these longer shots, it may be their only chance to win the race. It's just like get out to a huge lead and hope that the rest of the field doesn't time the run correctly and lets you get a little bit too loose. So yeah, if I had a 51 and shot in the Derby that had any sort of early speed, I would just send him and hope for the best.
So you're both down on Sierra Leone because of the approach and how this particular horse has to make kind of a late push, Sean.
Yeah, he hasn't impressed me as much, visually as he has with others. I think he's gotten pretty favorable setups in terms of the pace, and now you're just adding more horses in front of him. And there's just so much that can go wrong if he gets checked once, if he gets to stop once just because there's a horse in his path or that moves over in his path, his race is over. In the same respect, if Fierceness breaks poorly, his race is probably over too. So in a 20 horse field, so much can go wrong, which is why, people do say it's difficult to take a short price. I'm not necessarily betting, $1,000 on Fierceness to win it 3-2, but I am going to single him on top and try to find value making him the winner because I do think he is the likeliest winner. But yeah, I just think there's other horses who have a similar running style to Sierra Leone who may get the jump on him. And we could talk about that in the long shots, but Honor Marie, Mystic Dan, these are other horses who are going to be coming from further back, but a bit in front of where Sierra Leone's going to start. And all they need is just to get the right trip and they could outrun them. So significantly better odds than horses who I think have just as much of a difficult path, but who could potentially outrun them.
And I agree, Sean, and I mentioned it before. Look, Sierra Leone, super talented horse. There's not, I'm not going to take anything away from the horse. I mean, horse has virtually done nothing wrong. He's a nose away from being a perfect 4-for-4. He's continued to, progress from a buyer speed figure perspective in each and every start. And I don't think that he'll have any issues getting the distance. But I mentioned it in both of his last 2 starts. If you go back and watch those races, whether you want to call it greenness or whatever you want to call it, there's something a little off about the way he finishes the race. His head's a little cocked. He's moving, he's changing lanes throughout the stretch, right? When he doesn't need to be. There's a greenness to that. And in this race, you can't afford to do that. As you mentioned, any one misstep, whether it's by the horse or a poor decision by the jock. And I love Tyler Gaffalione, so it's nothing against him, but any one wrong move when you've got a deep closer like Sierra Leone, the race is over for you at that point. So look, I'll let him beat me on top. I think when we talk about, vertical exotics, something to be considered, but we'll get there.
Okay.
Yeah, he's the son of Gunrunner, and Gunrunner used to do the same thing, changing leads in the stretch until he turned 4. Once Gunrunner got a little bit older, he matured, and I love Gunrunner. He's one of my all-time favorite horses. I love betting on his sons and then on his daughters, but I do think these horses tend to mature at 4 instead of 3, and I don't necessarily view them as Derby contenders based on the pedigree as much as others might. I just think they take a little bit longer to fully mature. So yeah, it's another reason the greenness certainly, I think as Sierra Leone gets a little bit older, maybe by the time the Breeders' Cup Classic rolls around or even into his 4-year-old season, if he continues racing, I think he's going to be much more dangerous.
So with that analysis in mind, with the favorites, as we discuss some horses to toss at the front, and we'll get to exotics as Mike teased, we'll get to that next. Favorite long shots. You guys got a couple. Zerillo, go ahead.
Yeah, I've got 2 that I really like and then 2 in a tier below them. So
Okay.
the 2 that I like, the 15 domestic product, this is the other Chad Brown horse. He's got Sierra Leone and he's got the 15 domestic product in here. And domestic product doesn't necessarily fit on the speed figures. I talked about the speed figures with Fierceness being so far ahead of the rest of the field. Domestic product doesn't fit on the speed figures. His buyers are in the 80s, but he's been training as well as any horse leading up to this race. He's been giving Sierra Leone everything he can handle in their trips around the track this week. He also has a pedigree for sprinting, not for distance, which is another reason why I think people may not see it in him, but watching his races, he seems to want more ground and he seems to be working very hard at the end of his races. So the 15 domestic product, I think, is going to make a huge jump up in speed scores here. Chad Brown always getting his horses finally tuned off the bench. And then the number 19 Resilience for Beaumont also seems to be working as well as anybody at Churchill Downs this week. That is what I look for when I'm handicapping his races. So horses that I like, they're all going to have that in common this week, is that they're working well at Churchill Downs. But he ran a career best race in the Wood, which as Mike talked about, not a great prep race, has not produced a Derby winner in quite some time. But he did that coming off of a layoff, and now second start back. He wasn't expecting to win that race. I don't think Beaumont expected him to run as well as he did. Now coming back, second start off the layoff, looking better in training. I think he's ready to fire what should be a career best performance. So with the number 17 resilience, or with the number 17 fierceness, I'm going to try to get the number 15 domestic product or the number 19 resilience into an exacta. And then if we're expanding it out a little bit into trifectas, superfectas, or mostly trifectas, you don't want to build your superfecta ticket too deep. It would just cost too much money. But for trifecta purposes, the number 7 Honor Marie also working extremely well. I just think getting a little bit too much buzz, and I don't think you're going to get that 20-1 price tag that you currently see on the board. I think he's going to end up settling closer to 12-1 or 15-1 just because of all the people talking about him this week. But another horse like Sierra Leone, who's going to be coming from the back, just going to be getting a much better price on the 7 Honor Marie. And then the number 3 Mystic Dan ran a 101 buyer in the Southwest Stakes, but he did that over muddy track. So has the second best speed score in this field aside from fierceness, but he did do it in the mud. You can move him up, though, as Mike also mentioned. If there's going to be rain in the weather this weekend, he's definitely a horse I would consider moving up my rankings if it is going to rain or if the ground's going to be a little soft. So the 15 and the 19, my top long shots, the 7 and the 3 on the next tier. Yeah, that's how I rank out my my next tier of horses for now. But just the touch, like the 8, I have him before that tier of horses, just to be very clear. I'm just in the exacta. I'm going to try to get a price in there.
Okay. Mike Conti, you'd already expressed your favorite long shot to a degree, the number 8 horse. How else does the card shake out?
Oh, we're going bigger than that, Glash.
Okay.
The 8 is the top selection for me. Favorite long shot, though, Zerillo stealing a little bit of the thunder here, is domestic product. And I'll be honest, there was a point in time where I was close to putting domestic product as my top choice in this race, which to some people seems crazy. I went back and watched that Tampa Bay Derby and the Holy Bull. Both of them I watched multiple times. Here's what I love about domestic product. A horse that can close into a slow pace, that horse can do something special if given any bit of pace to run into. And when I say slow, just for everybody out there, we're talking domestic product running into fractions of 25-1, 51-1. I would expect the fractions of the Derby to be closer to like 24-1, and then maybe like a 48-3, 40, maybe a 49-1 half mile. So we're talking about, and in horse racing, a second is an eternity of time. And so this is a horse who's been able to close into slow paces. He's had to split horses, weave through traffic, didn't have the cleanest of trips. And yes, Sean mentioned it before. He's going to have to take a massive step forward from a buyer speed figure perspective. But look, you're also talking about 2 of the very best in this game, Chad Brown and Irad Ortiz Jr. Anytime that I can get 30-1 on those connections on a Klaravich horse, it's just too hard to pass up. I get it. It's the Derby. But I want to make this crystal clear. There was a point in time on Sunday night when I did my first pass of the Derby, and I thought that domestic product was going to be my top choice in this race. So he's absolutely my top long shot at 30-1. I don't think we're going to get 30-1. If we get anywhere near that, though, I think that there's some interest there. Another long shot that's interesting to me, which was one of Sean's tosses, is Just Steel. Again, another son of Justify. I don't think like the horse he's one of the most experienced horses in the race, which you can argue on both sides of the equation is good or bad, right? If they run the horse too much, has he had enough rest, whatever it may be. The horse ran a really good second to Muth in the Arkansas Derby. If you look at the Preakness future bets, Muth is the heavy favorite in the Preakness. So if Muth was in this race, he would at the very least be the second choice behind Fierceness, if not maybe even contend with Fierceness for that favorite spot. So Just Steel to me at 20-1, a really interesting horse. He's also run over this Churchill track twice. He's got to win in a 3rd place finish. So as a long shot, somebody to think about, somebody to include. The last horse that I'll mention that I think underneath on exotics has to be used, and it goes against a lot of what we've talked about in terms of closers, is Catching Freedom. The horse, again, another deep closer. He continues to improve. He's improved his buyer speed figure every start of his career, of his 5 starts. But here's the other reason. Jockey Flavian Pratt is aboard. Pratt has had 6 Derby starts. He's been in the money 5 times, 1 win, 1 second, and 3 thirds. When you have a jockey that understands the way that this race unfolds with a horse at 8-1, that's a horse that you have to use in your exotics, in my opinion.
Okay. Excellent. Good stuff. Let's, you guys good to go to exotics?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. Here we go. We'll start exactas. Zerillo.
Yeah, so if I'm playing my top two selections, right, just the touch and fierceness, I'd want to do it cold. I'd want to do a 17-8 exacta cold, no other selections in there. I think the way you juice it up, the way you make it more spicy, and you can absolutely play that one. But I think the way to find some odds would be to play the 17 fierceness on top of the 15 domestic product, and then also on top of the 19 resilience. $2 exacta would cost you $4 there, but you would get much juicier odds if that ended up hitting. Also curious how Mike would go about playing domestic product, considering we like this horse so much. If he considers it a win play, show play, how he'd go about that. That's what I'm thinking I'm going to end up doing with domestic product. If the odds are 30-1 or 25-1, even 20-1, probably interested in a win play show bet in domestic product. So curious to hear Mike's thoughts on that. But taking those same opinions, right? The 17, the 8, the 15, the 19, that's my superfecta essentially. That's how I'd play them in a trifecta. The 17 on the first line, the 8, the 15, and the 19 on the second and third line. So to come in either second or third, a $1 trifecta would cost you $6 there. If you want to go, and the same with the super, the 17 on top of the 8, 15, 19, second, third, fourth, $1 super would cost you $6. So that's the cheaper ways I'd go about playing the exactas, the trifectas, the superfecta. If you want to get a little bit deeper into the weeds of the trifecta, trying to find a way to play it, the first is the caveman method, where you can just do the 17 on top, fierceness, and then probably like 7 to 9 horses underneath him. The trimmer way to do it is to take the 17 who I like, the 8, 15, and 19 who I like, and put those on 2 of the 3 lines. So you have one ticket that's 17, 8, 15, 19 in second, and then a bigger group of horses in third, and then a second ticket where you flip that second and third line. So one ticket will be 17, 8, 15, 19, and then a group of 9 horses, which includes 8, 15, 19. And then 17, that same group of 8 or 9 horses, and then 8, 15, 19 in third. So you're trying to get fierceness in the money. You're trying to get one of just the touch or for, domestic product or resilience in the money, and then a bigger group of horses, all of which we discussed, the horses who we didn't toss out at the beginning, as your third line. I haven't narrowed it down completely yet. My initial group, though, was 3, 7, 8, 11, 15, 18, 19, 20. I may swap out the 20 after what Mike and I discussed. I may swap out the 11. Mike doesn't like the 11 as much, but yeah, that's, all of my bets are keyed around the 17 winning and the 8, 15, or 19 finishing second or third, and then trying to find other prices to mix in there with them. Hopefully that makes some sense.
Okay. Mike, why don't you go ahead and attack here? Exactas, trifecta, and a superfecta.
Yeah, look, Glash, I'm going to keep it pretty simple, right? I told you, just a touch is where I'm landing as my top selection. I'm going to put him on top of every bet. And then I'm going to, mix and match pending upon odds. So one thing that I would implore people to do is, as when the race before the Derby finishes and they post it, it goes official, you can go and look at what are called probables to understand what your payouts are going to be on exactas. You should be looking, when you're playing exactas, you should be looking at the probables so that you don't have to box things, so that you can figure out how much should you bet, because your base bet amount should vary based on what the potential windfall would be if your bet hits. As an example, the just a touch with fierceness exacta, let's just say that it's going to pay $30, but the just a touch with domestic product is going to pay, I don't know, Zerillo, help me maybe try to figure this out. It's going to pay like $200 or something for
Yeah,
$1.
I was thinking 200. Sure.
Yeah, 180 to 200, somewhere in there. So
yeah, like
if
100 to 1. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I'm doing that, right, you have to think about it and say, okay, so the just a touch over fierceness it's gonna be 5 times less than what the just a touch with domestic product is going to be. So that's going to change the dollar amounts that I'm going to bet. I think, look, we've learned this in the past. Betting a straight exacta delivers the most value, but there's interesting ways that you can bet multiple straight exactas. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to hit all of them, but you figure out the right way to bet them. That's how you kind of can get an edge in horse racing. That being said, here's how I'm going to go about it, Glash. Playing just a touch over domestic product. I'm going to play just a touch over fierceness. Those are the two exactas that I'm going to play. My trifecta is going to look something like just a touch over domestic product and fierceness. And then I'm going to put domestic product, fierceness, and catching freedom, the 4 in third. So again, the trifecta would be 8 over 15, 17 over 4, 15, 17. And so that's the way that I'm going to play it. If you're going to play a super, while like it can be a massive, at times life-changing payday, it can get really expensive really quick. I actually tend to stay away from it, use my bankroll in other places throughout the day to build for the Derby so that I can bet bigger exotics. And listen, hopefully, and you can read it on actionnetwork.com, hopefully you'll be able to hit, you know, some of the multi-race wagers, which is where I anticipate being able to make even more money, hopefully.
Yeah, and that's what I build towards too, is, you know, and that's mostly what I'm spending my time doing, is narrowing down this field and finding which horses I actually like to win. So in the multis, I'm either closing out all my tickets with just the 17 fierceness, or I'm going to include some of the 8 just a touch, but it's one or two or just one for me across multi-race tickets. And as I said, for the vertical exotics for this race, it's just the 17 fierceness. So yeah, but may use just the touch across multi-race tickets. I like to have at least 2 horses alive for the Derby. It's not as much of a fun sweat when you're alive at a pick 4 and pick 5 and you only have 1 horse left. It definitely gets a little bit nerve-wracking.
Good stuff. I think the beauty too of podcasting is people can go back and rewind and hit that 15-second back, and they got to go down and write things back or whatever.
Grab a pen, grab a pad. You know, it's definitely with the numbers for horse racing, but we're trying to say the names too and connect them together. But yeah, pull up the post positions. It's an easy way to compare the numbers as we're talking about them.
Yeah, I think our producer is doing that as we also do this podcast too. So he's a good lesson for that particular approach. I'll send it back to Conti here for an undercard breakdown for Derby Day, please.
Yeah, I've finished all, like I mentioned earlier at the top of the podcast, I finished all my homework. I'm going to give one best bet on the undercard on Saturday. And we're going to go to race 10, which is the grade 1 Churchill Downs. And I'm going to go to number 3, Beau Cruz. He's 10-1 on the morning line. I'm not going to give the people some favorite. This horse, he won the Commonwealth last time out. Going into the Commonwealth, I called just about anybody and everybody that I could to tell them that he was going to win this race. He went off at 6-1. So he paid a pretty penny in that race and he won for fun. I mean, just going away. And yes, is this a step up in class going from grade 3 to grade 1? Absolutely. No questions asked. That being said, I very much expect this horse to continue to move forward. He's already won at this distance and he's won at Churchill Downs. So you put those things, you take those into account. You get jockey Jose Ortiz. There's just a lot to like about Beau Cruz at 10-1. I don't think we're getting 10-1, frankly, on Saturday, but he is the best bet on the undercard, and he will be a horse that I'm building multi-race tickets around as that single so that I can spread in some other races.
It's a tremendous name, too.
I was wondering if Adam Sandler was his jockey.
And I will say this for those watching, you cannot miss him on the track. He's a beautiful gray horse with a tail that has some black and gray in it. When it's swishing around, you cannot miss him on the track. You'll know who he is.
Does he run in construction boots?
Oh God.
All right, let's go to the Kentucky Oaks selections. That's for Friday. And I know I'm glad Mike brought up weather and how that could play a factor earlier or later in the week leading into Saturday. So Zerillo, I can't remember if you have thoughts for Friday's card, but what do you got for us?
Yeah, no particular thoughts for the overall undercard on Friday, but do have some thoughts regarding the horses working best leading into the Kentucky Oaks, the 11 Ways and Means and the 13 Just FYI. Those are the 2 horses I'm going to end up picking, probably playing in an exact on top. I'm going to go against the favorite, the number 8 Tarifa, who also looks tremendous. I just think this is a very deep Oaks field. I think it's a much more competitive and wide open race than the Kentucky Derby. There's like 7 or 8 horses I could see in this 14 horse field winning. So very competitive edition of the Oaks. I'm going to take, though, the 11 and the 13 Ways and Means, and just the FYI. And in the Oaks Derby double, I'll play those two with the number 17 Fierceness and a 2-day bet. And hopefully we make some money going against the favorite Tarifa. But yeah, if I'm playing any multi-race tickets on Friday, I'll definitely be including Tarifa as well. Just don't think there's enough value including her alongside Fierceness and 2 other horses in a 2-day bet. But on a pick 5, I think there might be enough. So yeah, favorite. Don't think there's enough value to necessarily go with that as your 2-day bet, but I'll try to beat Tarifa.
And Tarifa's jockey is Pratt, Mike, who you spoke highly of so far in this episode.
Yeah. Look, I agree with Sean. I also think that this is a weekend where you try to throw out some favorites if you can. I'm not saying totally toss them, maybe not letting them beat you like I talked about with Fierceness. I actually am playing completely against Tarifa in here. I'm not using her in any of my tickets. If I get beat by her, I get beat by her. I'll go to sleep Friday night. I'll wake up Saturday morning ready to fire. For the Oaks, though, I ended up on number 5, Torpedo Anna. She's like her name suggests. I mean, torpedo. I mean, she's a freak. There was a point in time a couple of months ago that there were talks of trying to get her into the Derby. Trainer Kenny McPeak, who can be somewhat loud and boisterous at times, I mean, he said that someone better bring a beast to counter her because she's coming in the best form of her life. She's been training just lights out. And at 5-1, give me that chance. Second off the layoff, another horse who's run at Churchill before. She's got 1 win and 1 second from 2 career starts. Really hasn't done much wrong. 3 wins from 4 career lifetime starts. So Torpedo Anna is the top selection for me. One of the horses that I'm using underneath, Sean mentioned, Ways and Means. The horse was the odds-on favorite in the Gulfstream Park Oaks. That was off a really long layoff, though. Ways and Means ran in the Spinaway last summer at Saratoga after absolutely demolishing the field in her first career start. She clipped heels, which means that she caught another hoof of another horse when they were running. She still finished second, but she had an ankle fracture. So she had been off for a really long time. She came back into training. She trained up to the Gulfstream Park Oaks. You can easily say that she needed that race to get back after being off for more than 6 months. She's another Chad Brown trainee. So look, if he didn't believe that she was ready for this spot, he wouldn't put her in here. So I'm absolutely going to use Ways and Means underneath. Another horse at 5-1. And then the last horse that I've got in the Oaks is all the way to the outside, number 14, Leslie's Rose. Look, she's tied for the highest last out by her speed figure in the Ashland. And she did that, and she had to wait behind horses on the turn. Then she found room coming out of the turn, swung a little wide, and exploded for home. So I think another horse that you absolutely have to include, and another fair price at 4-1.
All right, gentlemen, excellent work. Mike Conti, Sean Zerillo, you can find their breakdowns, picks, best bets over in the Action Network app, actionnetwork.com. Mike's going to have a full breakdown available there ahead of Saturday. And I'm sure you'll have some stuff for Friday too, Mike.
Oh, yeah. Friday and Saturday, both will be up.
Excellent. Very good. Okay, that's going to do it for our Kentucky Derby betting preview. For Sean Zerillo, Mike Conti, Brendan Glasheen, thanks for tuning in to the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM. Best of luck. Enjoy the ponies, and we'll join you next time.